Hi guys, today's lesson is called You Got a Faithful Friend in Me. And our sticky statement is be a faithful friend on whom others can depend. You know about volcanoes. An active volcano can actually spew lava, hot molten rock, from the Earth's crust and can cause great damage. It is an amazing but terrifying sight. Indonesia, Japan, Russia, the United States, and Iceland all have more than 100 volcanoes each. Do you know there is another geological feature besides volcanoes that erupt? In just 5 countries of the world, there are things called geysers that erupt. But they don't spew lava like volcanoes do. They spew extremely hot water. But basically, there are 3 parts to a geyser. The first part is the reservoir. Deep underground are reservoirs, like large pockets filled with water. Below these water reservoirs is a thin layer of rock that separates it from hot magma. The magma heats the water, and like a pot on the stove, the water begins to bubble and move. Second is the channel. This is the pathway out of the earth through which the water flows. And the third part is the geyser spout. The water heats up so much that it bursts through that channel and out of the cracks in the ground for the world to see. The 5 countries in the world that have geysers are the United States, Russia, Chile, New Zealand, and Iceland. In the United States, we have Yellowstone National Park. And it is home to a famous geyser called, do you know? Old Faithful. Let's watch a video of Old Faithful erupt. Pretty amazing, right? The water from the geyser is about 204 degrees Fahrenheit, and the steam is about 350 Fahrenheit. This is about the same heat you need to bake cookies in the oven. The water can shoot about 140 feet high. This is about as tall as a 13-story building. What makes Old Faithful famous is that its eruptions are dependable. Unlike most geysers, park rangers can predict when the next eruption will occur. The eruptions happen every 60 to 110 minutes. Old Faithful got her name for this consistency. Did you know that God wants us to be like the geyser, Old Faithful? No, not a big hothead spouting off steam, but he wants us to be dependable. He wants us to be faithful. Today's lesson is the 3rd lesson in a 4-part series called Snapshots of Character. Each of the lessons in this series is designed to help us develop godly character in our lives. The first 2 lessons in the series, we dealt with kindness. The second 2 will deal with faithfulness. Let's read from the Bible about someone who knew how to be a faithful friend on whom others can depend. This lesson on faithfulness comes from a book in the New Testament portion of the Bible called Philippians. Faithfulness is the quality of being trustworthy or reliable. The Apostle Paul wrote a letter to the church at Philippi to help give them instruction, guidance, and correction in living as followers of Jesus Christ. We call Paul's letter the book of Philippians. The Apostle Paul was a man who had an amazing story. He went from persecuting Jesus' followers to becoming a follower of Jesus himself. He began spreading the good news of how God showed his love for everyone through his son, Jesus. Today we are going to read about one of Paul's friends. In Paul's letter to the church of Philippi, Paul specifically mentions the name of a certain friend. He used this friend as an example of faithfulness. Before we get to his friend, here is a little background information about Paul. Paul would travel all over the area, sharing the truth that Jesus is God's Son and that everyone could be saved from sin. This news was not always received well and would get Paul into some awful situations. When he wrote this letter, he was actually in prison. Paul wrote about his time in prison in his letter to the church of Philippi. He told the people he was in jail because of preaching the good news of Jesus. He was not discouraged about this because others were encouraged to talk about Jesus as a result of Paul's trouble. This was a very bold thing to do during this time of history. People were imprisoned, beaten, and suffered severe punishment when arrested. Paul stayed faithful to Jesus, and he was an encouragement to others to stay faithful. It was from this situation that Paul shared about a friend, Epaphroditus. Yep, that was his name, Epaphroditus. Can you repeat that with me? Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus had been sent by the believers at Philippi to care for Paul while he was in prison. Let's read what Paul has to say about Epaphroditus. Paul described this man in 3 ways. As we read about him, see if you can figure out the 3 ways Paul described Epaphroditus. I'm going to read Philippians 2:25. 2:25 reads, "Yet I suppose it necessary to send you to Epaphroditus, my brother and companion in labor and fellow soldier, but your messenger and he that ministered to my wants." What are the 3 ways Paul described his friend? That's right. His brother, his fellow laborer / worker, and soldier. Paul chose some interesting ways to describe his friend, and each of those adjectives share a common characteristic. Paul described Epaphroditus as a faithful friend on whom others can depend. Raise your hand if you have a brother. You may not always get along with your brother, but you know deep down, if you really need help, you should be able to count on or depend on your brother to come to your rescue. Raise your hand if your teacher ever split your class into groups to work on projects. Each worker in a group project must be able to depend on each other to complete the task the teacher assigned. In the military, soldiers have difficult missions they must complete that are often dangerous. To complete the mission, soldiers must be able to depend on each other as they work together as a unit. In Paul's letter, he called Epaphroditus a brother, a worker, and a soldier. Epaphroditus was a faithful friend on whom Paul could depend. His life demonstrated the quality of being trustworthy or reliable. While caring for and helping the Apostle Paul while he was in prison, Epaphroditus got sick, really sick. In fact, Epaphroditus almost died. Epaphroditus risked his own life to minister to the Apostle Paul and share the love of Jesus with others. Listen to what Paul wrote in Philippians 2:27. Philippians 2:27 reads, "For indeed he was sick, nigh unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow." Paul expressed his thankfulness to God for healing his friend. Paul sent his friend back to Philippi so he could continue the work of the ministry. That's Philippians 2:26-28. Paul asked the Philippians to welcome his friend Epaphroditus back home with joy and honor because he risked his life and yet continued to be faithful in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. As followers of Jesus, our goal is to be more like him every day. We can learn about the character of God from the Bible and use it to help us develop our character, our words, and our actions. Epaphroditus is a great example of someone who showed the love of Jesus through the character quality of faithfulness. Let's read Psalms 33:4 reads, "For the word of the Lord is right, and all his works are done in truth." God's words are always right and true. We can count on the faithfulness. Throughout the Bible, we see God is faithful and dependable. Listen to what 1 Corinthians 1:9 reads, "God is faithful, by whom ye were called unto the fellowship of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord." God is faithful. Because God is faithful, we should be faithful too. Listen to what Hebrews 10:23 reads. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. We should remain faithful to Jesus because God is faithful. Epaphroditus demonstrated this type of faithfulness. Remember the parts of a geyser? The water inside the reservoir is heated by the magma deep within the earth, and then it bursts out above the ground. We should be filled with God's love and faithfulness because he has been faithful to us. This faithfulness should burst out through the channel of our actions and words. Everyone should see the faithfulness of God on display in our lives. Being dependable or faithful means we do what is needed or expected, even if it requires sacrifice on our part. This may mean you are not able to do what you want to do, so you can complete what you need to do. Our faithfulness to God can be on display as we demonstrate our faithfulness to others. Can others depend on you to be faithful? Epaphroditus was sent by the church to help Paul. This meant that he left home to care for someone in prison. How many people do you know that are willing to leave the comfort of their own home for a rundown prison? Epaphroditus demonstrated he knew how to be a faithful friend on whom others can depend because he was first faithful to God. As we read in Paul's letter, Epaphroditus did exactly what he was asked to do. Paul described Epaphroditus as a brother, worker, and soldier to show he was faithful and dependable. What are some other words you could use to describe someone who is dependable? That's right. Loyal, reliable, trustworthy, etc. Those are great words and great goals for someone to use to describe you, too. How can you reflect the faithful character of Jesus toward your friends like Epaphroditus did for Paul? Let's brainstorm a little bit. What are some ways to be a faithful friend? Yeah, it could include keep your promises, don't abandon a friend when the more popular person is around, be a friend to the person who isn't the most popular kid. What about your role as a student? What are some ways to be a faithful student at school? Show up to class, pay attention in class, do your homework, turn in assignments on time, study, work diligently in all things. What are the roles as a child in your home? What are some ways to be a faithful child or sibling at home? Do the chores right away, each time, keep your room clean and help your parents around the house. Obey. Make a point to treat your siblings like they are created in the image of God. So how will you reflect the faithfulness of God to others? Will you choose to be trustworthy, to be a trustworthy friend to the kid everyone else ignores? Will you choose to work diligently on your school project before going out to play with your friends? Will you choose to complete the chores your parents ask you to complete first instead of playing a video game as soon as you walk in the door? God's faithfulness to us should be the reason we will be a faithful friend on whom others can depend. Because he has been faithful to us, we can be faithful to others. Old Faithful got its name because it could be trusted to shoot water in the air on a consistent basis. God has been faithful to you. How can you be faithful to others? God desires for you to develop the character traits of faithfulness. God wants you to be a faithful friend on whom others can depend. Will you choose to be a faithful friend on whom others can depend? If you want to demonstrate faithfulness in your life, will you take time now to chat with God to reveal any behaviors you need to change and to help you make the choices necessary to be faithful? Ask him to help you to be a faithful friend on whom others can depend. Do you know how to become a faithful person? Becoming faithful happens one small action at a time. You can't just become faithful overnight. Faithfulness is a result of choosing to do the faithful thing each time over a period of time. What is a task your parents consistently ask you to do, but you have not been good at completing? That could be your one small action to focus on every day this week at home. In school, maybe your one small action could be turning in your homework on time every day. Maybe it's to make the choice to study before playing games or hanging out with friends. How will you choose to be faithful to your friends this week? I'll put a little thing on the screen. Write down or think about how you will choose to be faithful as a friend, as a student, and as a child at home. Let's read Hebrews 10:23. It reads, "Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promises." What word is defined as the quality of being trustworthy or reliable? That's right, faithfulness. Who wrote the book of Philippians? Paul. Where was Paul when he wrote the letter to the Philippians? He was in prison. Why was Paul in prison? For preaching about the good news of Jesus. Who did the Philippians send to care for Paul? His friend, Epaphroditus. What were some words Paul used to describe Epaphroditus? Right. Brother, fellow laborer, worker, and soldier. What happened to Epaphroditus while he was caring for Paul? He got sick and he almost died. How did Paul instruct the Philippians to greet Epaphroditus when he returned home? Yes, welcome back home with joy and honor. True or false? We can become faithful by just praying about being faithful. False. What should God's faithfulness to us cause us to be toward others? That's right, faithful. That's the end of the lesson. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a great, safe, and blessed week. And apply this lesson to your everyday lives. And remember to be faithful friend on whom others can depend.